The training hall reeked of sweat, gun oil, and freshly waxed boots. The kind of place where discipline was beaten into your bones until every step, every salute, and every breath was owned by the uniform. Rows of recruits stood stiff in their pressed fatigues, eyes forward, chests out, waiting for the storm they knew was coming. It wasn't a question of if, it was when. That storm had a name, Captain Rourke. He entered the hall with the kind of presence that forced silence, boots striking the floor in sharp, echoing steps. Rourke was the kind of officer who enjoyed fear. He fed off it. His uniform was always immaculate, his medals polished to a mirror shine, and his voice, a serrated blade that cut recruits down before they had a chance to breathe. His reputation wasn't built on strategy nor leadership, but on humiliation. If you stumbled under his watch, you were meat on a butcher's block. "Eyes on me," Rourke barked, his voice snapping across the room like a whip. Instantly, the recruits obeyed. He paced the line, his eyes scanning like searchlights, looking for weakness, for hesitation. His stare settled on a tall, wiry young man standing near the end of the row. His name tag read, Carter. Private Nathan Carter. Barely 21, Carter had joined the program just weeks earlier. His posture was straight, his jaw tight, but there was something about him that drew Rourke in. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that didn't quite fit the image of a green recruit. Maybe it was the way he didn't flinch like the others. Whatever it was, Rourke locked onto it like a predator finding prey. "You," Rourke said, stopping directly in front of Carter. "Step forward." Carter obeyed, boots hitting the floor with precision, stopping exactly where protocol demanded. He kept his chin level, eyes forward. Rourke circled him like a vulture. "Private Nathan Carter. Tell me, Carter, what makes you think you belong here?" "Sir," Carter replied evenly, "I signed up to serve, sir." A smirk spread across Rourke's face, sharp and ugly. To serve, how noble. He leaned closer, his voice lowering just enough for the recruits to hear the venom in it. "You look like you've never seen a day of real service in your life. Soft hands, fresh face, no scars. Tell me, Carter, did Mommy pack your bags for you when you came here?" A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the recruits, though none dared laugh outright. Carter didn't blink. "No, sir," he said, voice steady. The captain stepped back, spreading his arms theatrically. "Look at this, everyone. Fresh blood. A boy who thinks wearing a uniform makes him a soldier. You think this is a game. You think this is some movie where you'll walk out a hero." He jabbed a finger into Carter's chest, hard enough for a lesser man to stumble. Carter didn't move. The captain's smirk grew darker. "You have no experience, none. You've never been under fire, never had to bury a friend, never seen real combat, and yet here you stand pretending you belong." The silence in the room thickened. Rourke was drawing it out, savoring the humiliation. Carter's jaw flexed, but he kept his composure. Rourke leaned in close again. "Tell me, recruit, what makes you think you're worthy to stand among men who've actually bled for this country?" Carter's voice was calm, too calm. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Rourke sneered. "By all means, dig your own grave." The recruit reached into the pocket of his uniform and with slow precision pulled something out. A small, rectangular black case, worn around the edges, the leather cracked from years of use. He opened it and held it out for everyone to see. Inside gleamed a medal. Not just any medal. The Silver Star. The room froze. Every recruit knew what that meant. Acts of gallantry in combat, risking one's life against enemy forces. It was one of the highest honors a soldier could earn, second only to the Medal of Honor. Carter didn't flinch as whispers rippled through the room. His voice cut through the silence like steel. "I earned this at 19, he said evenly, eyes never leaving Rourke's. My unit was ambushed overseas. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and pinned down. I carried 3 wounded men out under heavy fire. I stayed behind so the rest could escape. We lost good men that day, but we didn't lose everyone. That's why this medal exists." The recruits stood frozen, their faces shifting from nervous smirks to wide-eyed disbelief. Even the boldest among them looked down, ashamed. Rourke's smirk faltered, just for a moment. Carter slid the medal back into its case and tucked it away with the same calm precision. "So, sir, with all due respect, I don't need to pretend I belong. I've already been there. I've already paid the price."
The silence was suffocating. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Rourke's jaw tightened. His authority, his carefully crafted image of dominance had just been shattered in front of every pair of eyes in the room. The humiliation he had intended for Carter had turned to ash, and the burn of it showed in his clenched fists. For the first time, it was the officer who looked unsettled. Carter stepped back into line without another word, his posture unshaken, his face unreadable. The recruits around him straightened, their eyes flicking toward him with something that looked like respect. Rourke tried to recover, barking new orders, but his voice lacked the same edge. His steps were too sharp, too fast, betraying his anger. He dismissed the recruits, but the damage had been done, and Carter knew it. As the recruits filed out, whispers followed in his wake. He didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge the ripple he had caused, but deep inside he felt the shift. Not triumph, not pride, just the cold knowledge that the storm he had unleashed wasn't over. Because men like Rourke didn't forget, and they didn't forgive. The corridors of the barracks echoed with laughter that wasn't laughter. It was sharp, calculated, and cruel, the kind that thrived in whispered corners where authority lurked in shadows. Carter walked past groups of recruits who pretended not to stare. Some glanced down with quiet respect, others smirked, emboldened by the captain's whispered poison. By the second week after the incident in the hall, Carter understood Rourke's nature better than most. Humiliation was Rourke's lifeblood. Carter had stripped him of it in front of 50 recruits. That kind of wound didn't heal, it festered. And so the games began. Assignments changed suddenly. Where others had their schedules balanced, Carter's were doubled. Late-night watch shifts followed by dawn drills, endless laps around the training grounds, cleaning duties that stretched long past exhaustion. It wasn't punishment on paper, it was discipline. Official enough to be unchallenged, unofficial enough to be personal. Carter bore it all in silence. But silence has a sound. It was in the way he showed up, blistered hands gripping his rifle steady, the way his boots hit the ground in rhythm, never faltering, no matter how many laps Rourke ordered, the way sweat dripped into his eyes as he pushed through obstacle courses long after others collapsed. The recruits saw it. They whispered about it at night, in bunks where the captain's eyes couldn't reach. Some began to follow Carter's pace. Some began to trust him more than the man meant to lead them. And that, the shift of loyalty, was something Rourke couldn't ignore. One morning, the recruits were assembled at the firing range. Sunlight beat down on the line as rifles cracked through the air. Rourke prowled behind them, correcting postures with sharp insults, barking orders at those who flinched under recoil. When he reached Carter, he stopped. "Private Carter, since you've already painted yourself a war hero, let's see if you can back it up." Carter kept his eyes forward, his rifle aimed at the distant target. Rourke sneered. 10 shots, rapid fire. And if you miss even one, the entire platoon runs 5 miles tonight, on your failure." A murmur rippled through the recruits. The punishment wasn't just cruel, it was designed to turn his brothers in arms against him. Carter inhaled, steady and slow. He squeezed the trigger. 10 shots cracked out, sharp and precise. When the smoke cleared, 10 bullet holes punctured the target, tight grouping, center mass. Silence followed. then a low whistle from the far end of the line. Rourke's jaw twitched. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, but the words felt hollow to him. He barked for the recruits to continue, his face a mask of forced control. That night, while the others rested, Carter found his locker overturned, boots tossed, uniform slashed, his metal case missing. He searched every corner of the barracks until he found it, dumped in a latrine caked in filth. He cleaned it in silence. But something in him shifted that night. Not anger, not grief, something colder. A quiet calculation, a patience that had carried him through fire before. He had seen men like Rourke overseas, officers who fed on control, who broke others to mask their own fear. And he knew one thing: they always went too far. It was only a matter of time. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was raining hard, sheets of water slamming against the training grounds, mud swallowing boots with each step. The recruits were ordered into combat drills, grappling in soaked uniforms, slipping in the muck. Rourke stood under cover, dry and smug, barking commands. "Carter," he called, "step up." Carter obeyed, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "You'll spar Corporal Hayes," Rourke announced. Hayes was a brick of a man, older, stronger, and clearly chosen for this moment. He cracked his knuckles, eyes flashing with reluctant apology. "Begin." Hayes lunged. Carter dodged, boots sliding in the mud, countering with swift precision. The two men clashed, fists and grips meeting with bone-jarring force. The recruits circled, cheering, shouting, torn between excitement and unease. Carter held his ground, striking, slipping, locking Hayes in a hold before releasing him with controlled restraint. He wasn't fighting to win, he was fighting to prove control. But Rourke's voice cut through. "Harder! Show us if you're a real soldier!" Hayes hesitated. Rourke's roar thundered. "I said harder!" The corporal obeyed, charging again, fists brutal. Carter blocked, countered, but the hits grew heavier. He felt blood mix with rain on his lip, his ribs aching under the assault. Rourke's smile widened. Carter caught Hayes's arm in a sudden grip, twisting it, slamming him into the mud. The corporal struggled, but Carter's strength, born of necessity, of survival, pinned him down. The recruits erupted in cheers. Rourke's face darkened. "Enough!" Carter released Hayes, helping him up with a nod of respect. Hayes gave a subtle nod back, at acknowledgement, not of defeat, but of understanding. But Rourke wasn't finished. His voice cut through the rain. "You think you're proving something, Carter. You're nothing but a lucky survivor. Real soldiers don't need medals to remind them who they are." The recruits fell silent. Even Hayes looked at him, disbelief in his eyes. Carter straightened, rain streaming down his face. His voice, calm but carrying, answered. "Real soldiers don't humiliate their own men to feel powerful, sir." It was the line no one had dared speak. The recruits froze. Rourke's face turned crimson, veins standing out at his temple. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared, shaking with rage. When he finally spoke, his words were a promise. "You'll regret that, Carter." The storm in his tone was worse than the rain. That night, Carter lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Around him, whispers spread like fire. Some recruits spoke of him as a leader, the one who stood up when no one else dared. Others warned him to keep his head down, that Rourke wasn't done. Carter knew both were true. But he also knew something else. Men like Rourke always underestimated the quiet ones, the ones who endured, who waited, the ones who had already faced worse than humiliation. Carter closed his eyes, the memory of gunfire echoing in his mind, the weight of his medal heavy in his chest pocket. Rourke thought he had broken him. He had no idea what was coming. The weeks crawled by with the weight of storm clouds pressing on the horizon. Carter knew Rourke wasn't finished. He could see it in the captain's eyes, hear it in the way his boots struck harder against the floor when Carter was in sight, feel it in the extra drills, the sudden inspections, the cruel silences stretched thin like wires about to snap. But Carter also knew something else. Men like Rourke didn't just punish, they orchestrated, they plotted, and when the blow came, it would be more than words or long marches. It would be personal. The breaking point arrived on a night thick with fog, when the recruits were ordered into a surprised field exercise. They were dropped miles from the base, told to navigate back through rough terrain, compass and grit their only tools. It was the kind of exercise meant to build teamwork, sharpen instincts. But this one carried a different weight. Rourke had quietly altered the maps, deliberately misled Carter's group, knowing the fog would disorient them further. It wasn't about training, it was about setting Carter up for failure, about leaving him exposed so the others would see him as weak. Hours into the march, the recruits stumbled through mud and brambles, frustration building. Compass bearings didn't align with the landmarks, paths led to nowhere. Some whispered of turning back. Others blamed Carter. He was the one at the front, the one they instinctively followed now. Rourke's plan was working. But Carter wasn't blind. He felt the trap in the air, the wrongness of it. He remembered nights overseas when enemy fire drove men into confusion, when only the calmest head could find a way out. He halted the group, scanning the horizon through the shifting fog. He spotted a distant ridgeline, faint but steady, a landmark that couldn't be faked.
"This way," he said simply, his voice firm. Some hesitated, others followed. Step by step, Carter led them out of the maze, navigating by instinct more than compass, by memory more than map. Hours later, when the fog broke, the base lights shimmered faintly in the distance. Exhausted, filthy but intact, the group stumbled through the gates. They had made it back, against the captain's rigged game. Rourke's jaw clenched as he watched them return. His plan had failed. And worse, the recruits' eyes no longer held suspicion toward Carter. They held trust. That was the moment Carter knew the captain was cornered, and cornered men were dangerous. The retaliation came swift and cruel. During a routine drill, Rourke singled Carter out again, this time in front of commanding officers who had come to observe. With venom in his voice, he accused Carter of insubordination, of disrespect, of undermining his authority. His words dripped with false conviction, painting Carter as a rogue recruit who thought himself above the chain of command. The officers listened in silence. Carter stood rigid, his fists clenched at his sides. He could have spoken, could have defended himself, but instead he waited. Because he had prepared for this. Carter had quietly documented everything: the altered maps, the manipulated schedules, the vandalized belongings. Recruits who once feared speaking had confided in him, and their statements now sat tucked away in a small folder. Even Hayes, the corporal used as a pawn, had signed his name to the truth. When Rourke finished his tirade, Carter stepped forward, calm, controlled. "Permission to present evidence, sir." Confusion rippled through the officers. Rourke blinked, caught off guard. "Evidence? What nonsense!" But Carter's folder hit the table with a sharp slap, papers sliding out, maps marked with false coordinates, signed testimonies, photographs of his destroyed belongings, proof of sabotage, proof of abuse. The room shifted. Officers leaned forward, scanning the documents. Murmurs filled the air. Rourke's face drained of color. Carter's voice cut through, steady and cold. "Sir,
This isn't about discipline. It's about one man's pride, one man's need to break others to mask his own weakness. His gaze locked onto Rourke's, unflinching. And that man is unfit to lead soldiers. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The senior officer, a colonel with weathered eyes, finally spoke. "Colonel Rourke, you will stand down pending formal review." His voice carried finality, the kind that stripped ranks as easily as tearing fabric. Rourke sputtered, rage spilling from him in incoherent protests, but the colonel's glare silenced him. Guards stepped forward, escorting him out of the hall. His boots, once sharp with authority, now dragged against the floor. And just like that, the storm broke. The recruits erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective exhale, as if a weight had been lifted from the room. Eyes turned to Carter, not as a recruit, not as a boy mocked for inexperience, but as something more, a leader. Carter said nothing. He simply stood there, chest rising and falling with quiet steadiness, the medal in his pocket heavy, but unspoken. Later that night, in the quiet of the barracks, Carter sat on his bunk. The room was alive with low voices, laughter, relief. Hayes approached, his massive frame casting a shadow. "You didn't just stand up to him. You ended him," Hayes said. Carter shook his head. "I didn't end him. He ended himself. I just made sure everyone saw it." Hayes studied him for a long moment before nodding. "That's what makes the difference between a fighter and a soldier." Carter didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because deep down, he knew the truth. His revenge hadn't been loud, hadn't been fueled by rage. It had been patient, precise, a quiet mirror held up to Rourke's corruption until it shattered him. And when the time came, Carter hadn't fought for himself. He had fought for every recruit humiliated, every soldier broken under arrogance disguised as command. That was the real victory. Days later, the announcement came down. Captain Rourke was stripped of command, his record under investigation, his career in ashes. And Private Nathan Carter? He was recommended for early promotion, his leadership praised, his resilience noted. But Carter didn't celebrate. He carried the medal still, its shine dulled, its weight eternal. He knew true victories weren't about medals or promotions. They were about endurance, about surviving storms and standing when the silence fell. And as he looked around the barracks, at the faces of men who no longer saw him as just a rookie, he understood something deeper. Revenge wasn't about rage. It was about truth. And truth had spoken.